Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ESL Talk. Today, we're taking a slight diversion from the world of ESL teaching specifically to look at the issue of cultural awareness and learn a little bit more about this topic in a professional context.
Yes, as English teachers and professionals, it is definitely important to cover this topic as we are exposed to many different students from all over the world, all different kinds of backgrounds. And our special guest, Li Ping, is going to join us today to talk about how she teaches cultural awareness as a teacher, as well as her approach to teaching Chinese to business professionals. So she
Yeah.
works teaching like Westerners, I guess,
Yes,
the Chinese cultural awareness, which is going to be an interesting flip on that
it
script.
is. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this topic. So, Faye, let's share a little bit about our experiences before we hear from Li Ping. So,
Mhm.
Faye, what does cultural awareness mean to you exactly?
I guess it's being a little bit more in tune with the background of the place or the language you're speaking. So
Mhm.
it's at least being prepared to learn. You might not necessarily know all of the conventions and all that, but for me, cultural awareness is understanding that all cultures are different. Languages and cultures are different, and we need to kind of always be prepared to learn and adapt to the culture of the place where we are at or the people we're talking to. How about for you, Daniel?
Yeah, I think it's really important to take time to get to know your learners and
Mm-hmm.
actually listen to them and take note of what they're saying to you,
Mm-hmm.
because then you can better connect with them. You can better explain things to them. You can teach them more effectively actually by understanding their awareness and their starting points and what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I found in the past that just because a student's from country X, it doesn't mean that that's the same as every other student, or that
Mm-hmm.
we need to avoid those generalizations, which we can sometimes make as English
Yes.
teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's about, like I said, having a good understanding, listening to your learners, learning from them, and kind of responding to them so that you can better serve them as a student, I would say.
Mm-hmm. For
Yeah.
sure.
But Faith, has living and working in Canada for you, has that opened your eyes to cultural awareness a little bit more? And if it has, how?
Absolutely. I feel like um, living in Brazil or growing up in Brazil,
Mhm.
a lot of the immigration and a lot of the movement happened about 100 years ago. So
Mhm.
you don't really meet people that are new immigrants. You don't really, you see, like you go to a Japanese restaurant and the people there might be second or third generation Japanese. So their culture is a little bit more Brazilian at that point.
Right.
So you don't really have to think too much about how you're going to, be respectful, or the way they talk to you might not be a language thing. They might not be there might not be rude or polite. It's a culture thing. So for
Hmm.
me,
Hmm.
I remember specifically when we moved here, we were living at a building that was managed by a lot of Eastern Europeans.
Hmm.
And I remember at the time, like our first contact with our building manager, I thought she was very rude. And then I was talking to a friend at work, and she's also Eastern European. And then she was telling me about like how hard it was for her to move to Canada because she like here she had to learn to be more polite the Canadian way. And then I
Hmm.
started telling her about the building manager, and all that. She's like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly the way we behave." In maybe in an Eastern European country where they're very direct, not a lot of like smiling and pleasantries. It's just let's get to the point. And then I learned, okay, this is a different culture. And for me, that was like eye opening to
Wow.
just experience and be more open minded to all the cultures around me. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's really cool. Very cool.
Now, how does this look for you in the classroom, Daniel? How do you deal with these different
Yes.
the clash
We've
of cultures?
Yeah, we've both obviously been in those situations in the classroom together. I think it's about using the material and using the theme or the lesson itself, use that as a way to develop cultural awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
by students communicating with each other, maybe some speaking drills, maybe some presentations, maybe some kind of question and answers. These are really nice to tackle cultural awareness. And in a society like Canada as well, we can also use that to explore different themes that we've talked about before, like gender or identity or
Mhm.
race or religion or sexuality. All these different things can be also really useful to do. Now, obviously, that depends on the age and the level of your student, but
Yeah.
cultural awareness could be something as simple as, where you live, you know, what's the diversity? What does diversity look like? What does it mean to you?
Mhm.
Okay, let's talk about this context and let's compare maybe, I don't know, for example, China and Iran and Saudi
Mhm.
Arabia. How do those three cultures, how is diversity represented? What does it look like? So things like that could be really, really useful. And even on a simple tweak you can do if you're just teaching one-on-one or you're teaching small groups, is if you have a reading or material that you're going through with a student, just ask them some questions about it. Oh, is this the case where you live, or have you ever
Mhm.
experienced this in your country? Okay, so what
Yeah.
happens in your country? Oh, tell me more. Let me learn about it. So again,
Yeah.
that can be a really simple thing you can do to build cultural awareness as well.
I think
Um,
as well, it
yeah.
makes students more receptive to learning about
Yes.
Western culture, let's say, let's call it that. But,
Right.
like English speaking countries and all that, because if you start from a point of what is it like in your country, and not
Hmm.
from a viewpoint of what is it like for you? How do you tip at a restaurant? It's more like,
Right.
how do people normally? And that's, I think, comes into our sensitivity as teachers to, not make things too personal at that point, and
Yes.
just like, let's generalize in a way, you
Yeah,
know.
it's a good
um
starting point, right? And then you
yeah.
can kind of develop further. And I think as well with that, you know, it can be a bit difficult sometimes to broach certain topics. So just by
Hmm.
by starting off quite general and quite vague,
Yeah,
then that can be a nice
exactly.
lead in to for you to build that trust ultimately, so that they can really open up. And we talk about this all the time. When you learn a language, you learn a culture as well. So
Yeah.
by asking students, you're taking a little bit of their experience, and you're trying to learn from that as well as a teacher.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in terms of planning and delivery, Faye, how would if you were going to teach cultural awareness or you wanted to incorporate it into your classes, how would that look like in your planning and delivery?
I think in those cases where you're specifically focusing on that, I think it's really important to consider who your students are. And that's why I don't think you can just take the same lesson plan and teach it the exact same way for a different
Mhm.
group. So for me, it really comes into play when I'm planning, because I think about the backgrounds of my students in that class, and having experience, like we have experience already with so many different backgrounds and cultures. You can kind of know when it's going to be a more sensitive topic, or you kind of already anticipate certain things, so you can plan your discussion questions and things like that to make things maybe a little bit less of a conflicting point or something like that. So that's where it comes into play for me in the planning stage. It's just knowing your students, and it goes back to what you mentioned as well. It's like you have to know your students first, get to
Right.
know them, know their
Absolutely.
backgrounds, know the baggage they bring into class with them,
Yeah.
and then use that in your planning so that you can anticipate those issues
Yeah.
and be ready to teach them and to deal with some of the challenges that might happen. I remember once I had an issue with a group of students. I was teaching business English specifically, and we were doing a lesson on, it was actually kind of ironic, but we were doing a lesson on etiquette and like what's polite, what's not polite. Or we were talking more about language, like things like could you please, using expressions like expressions for being polite.
Mhm.
And then there were a lot of my students were sick at this time. It was in the middle of winter, and they were in groups. And there was one group that were more. I put them into groups of the same cultural background, which I don't
Right.
normally do, but for this activity, I felt like it could be interesting.
Mhm.
And all of the students in the European group were really annoyed. I could tell that they were annoyed. And every time a student in the group of my Asian students, every time they had like Taiwanese and Korean students together, I think it
Mhm.
was. Every time somebody sniffed or went like this, I could see my European students cringe and give them a dirty look. And then every time my European students would blow their nose in class,
Yes.
I could see the other group looking at them like, what the hell? And then I realized, okay, maybe this is a good example. It's a good point for us to touch on. And I
Yes.
brought it up in class and we had an interesting discussion about that. And then a student of mine, one of the Europeans, was like, I was actually fighting with my housemate yesterday about this because
Wow.
we were having dinner and she kept making all these noises. And then she was mad at me because I was blowing my nose at the table. And I'm like, see, but it's not, you shouldn't be fighting. You should understand that it's different cultures.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's things like that will happen in your classroom if you have
Wow.
students from different backgrounds. And yeah, but then it kind of like eased the tension after we talked it over and realized it was a matter of what's accepted and not accepted. And we realized in some countries, it's more polite to blow your nose than to keep making all those noises. And in other countries, you never blow your nose in public, right?
Right. Wow. Amazing.
Anyway.
It's a really interesting example. And I think it kind of personifies what we're talking about how you can approach different things. Some things as mundane and as innocent as that, you can definitely use them as teaching points, and it definitely helps you again build that connection with your learners and hopefully open their mind and teach them not just the language but also the culture as well.
Right. Now, for our teachers or listeners, why do you think cultural awareness is important? And how, we already kind of mentioned that, but how can we start to consider this more when teaching?
If we fail to think about the culture of a student, we could lose that student in terms of their attention or their focus or their motivation in the class. Because if, of course, we need to treat all of our students equally, absolutely. However, we also need to make them feel as though they're valued and that they're listened to and that they're cared for. Because if you just say like, if you try to open up to me and say, oh, Daniel, I want to tell you a story of when I grew up, whatever, I don't care, we're here to learn English. Well, then you're never going to open up in a discussion, or you're not going to share something in the future because you feel like, well, I'm not valued, so why would I do that? So I think it's really important to value everyone's culture and their background so that you can hopefully build good connections, which leads to good communication, which leads to hopefully development in the language, and then also building that really nice classroom environment, even if it's just a one-on-one environment. Taking that genuine interest in your student can really help them feel more comfortable, more confident, and make progress. So I would say that's how you need to start doing it, and that's why cultural awareness is so important for us as teachers.
Yeah. Well, it's been a wonderful start to our episode today. I'm really curious to hear about teaching perspectives from a teacher who teaches another language, not English, and how that looks to English speakers. So let's now bring in Lipping.
All right, Lipping, thank you so much for joining us today on ESL Talk.
Well, thank you for having me on.
And yes, thanks so much for being here to share your ideas on cultural awareness and your approach to teaching learners another language. And I believe you teach Chinese, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Wow, amazing. So first, Lipping, can you tell us about your amazing journey and how you got into teaching business professionals Chinese communication?
All right. It's quite a long story, actually. I have been teaching Chinese as a second language for almost 11 years so far. So I used to teach Chinese in many different countries as a second language. For example, I used to teach in Thailand, China, the United States. I just love teaching language, just love teaching language and the Chinese culture in general. So I actually got my bachelor degree in teaching Chinese as a second language, my master degree in teaching Chinese as a second language, and my second master degree also in the same field. So I do really like what I'm doing. Yeah, so I used to, teach in many different countries. And then in 2015, I taught Chinese back in China at the university. At that time, I was, feel stuck in the same field for so long. So I was trying to find a new opportunity to, get out of my comfort zone to try some other chance. So at that time, I got a chance to teach Chinese in the United States as a visiting professor at the University of South Florida. So I moved to the United States in 2015 to teach Chinese as at a university. So I teach there for 4 years. It was a wonderful journey. And then at the same time, I realized that the more I teach and the more I realize that I don't know. I just don't know how to teach because it's different, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the environment is different, the learning is different, the context is different. So I decided to go back to school to learn, the new theories, the new technology, and the new techniques to how to teach Chinese. So basically, I taught Chinese as a professor, and at the same time, I'm also a full-time student at the same university. Yeah, so I was graduated from that university in 2019, basically like 3 years ago. So after I graduated from that university, I got a job in California, in the Bay Area. So I moved, because that university is in Florida. So I moved from Florida to the Bay Area. And that's the journey, the whole journey. And last year, because it was actually not last year, 2 years ago, because COVID has been 2 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So because COVID hit, I was feel very stressed about my job, because at that time I was a Chinese teacher at a public school in California. Very stressed. Every day, long commute, about 2 hours back and forth. You guys know how crazy it is for the traffic in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So everything went crazy. So I decided to, this is not what I need. This is not what I want. And I always want to start my own business. So I quit the job and moved to Mexico to start my own business. So this is the whole journey. Now, why I wanted to focus on business professionals is because, speaking of my own experience, teaching experience, I had the experience teaching all different kinds of learners, right? Kindergartners, 5 years old. And high schoolers, middle schoolers, university students, and also business professionals. So speaking from my experience, I noticed that for business professionals, some of them, they can speak very good Chinese. They're very fluent. They can express them very perfectly. But when it comes to the workplace or business environment, they feel struggle. They are struggling with how to use Chinese to communicate with colleagues, co-workers, clients, customers, business partners, because it's a different environment, right? Different context, and it require you have different set of communication skill to use the specific language, to use the specific cultural knowledge to handle the specific situation. So I decided, why don't I just put myself out there to help this specific group of people to, help them navigate the business world. Because we know that right now it's lots of company and they're doing business with China, right?
Yeah.
Global economic.
It's a huge market. Yeah.
Yeah. And lots of companies, they are planning to enter the Chinese market.
And what you mentioned makes total sense, because you're not just teaching them the language in that case. You have to teach them the culture and all of those, the rules that they have to follow. And that's what brings us to the topic of today's episode. So how do you go about teaching this cultural awareness, adding that on to the language to your students?
I think cultural awareness is the very popular topic, right? Yeah, when we talk about teaching language, teaching culture, or ESL, right?
It's the same for English, definitely. Yeah.
The same for English, as long as you're learning different language, right? Because the language and culture, they cannot separate it, right? Yeah, they go hand in hand. So I think when we're talking about culture awareness, the first thing we need to know that there's a difference there, right? Because we come from different we come from different cultural background. We speak different language. So it's definitely there's differences there. So what you're going to expect when you're interacting with people from different cultural background.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that there are differences there, but what are the differences? So that's the very first thing you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there's no cultural awareness because you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know that how come it's possible for you to talk about awareness?
Yeah.
Right. So for most of my clients, they have the experience of living in China or studying China for a couple of years. They speak some Chinese, so they may have some knowledge about Chinese culture. So they may have a certain level of culture awareness, but probably not like a business related.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably not like sophisticated enough to handle the situation in business environment. They probably can talk with people, greet to people, and handle the day-to-day conversation, but not in business environment.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I teach culture awareness? My way is to give them the culture context, because think about it, most of them they're living in the United States or somewhere else in the world, right? Not in China. So when we want to learn the authentic culture elements, we want to raise our culture awareness, we need the authentic culture environment and context. But it's impossible for them to access to it because they're not in that environment. So how do I teach it? I design the culture context for them.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if they need to negotiate with Chinese business partners, what language do they need to use? What body language do they need to conduct? Mm-hmm. What phrases they need to use? How do they handle the conflicts during the negotiation process? So I would design this context for them. Okay, right now we're in the office, so we're talking about this big deal, and we're negotiating the price in terms of which product. So this is the context. This is the language you need to use. And I'm gonna offer you the material, the language, the phrase, and the culture parts and knowledge we're gonna use to practice in this specific context. They need to be prepared before the class, right? So when you get prepared, so when you get prepared to come to my class, get yourself immersed in this cultural context, and we practice it like a real.
Very interesting.
Context is everything, for sure.
It is, and it's interesting you say, like, even because you just assume when you teach English, it's the same for everyone when you're communicating, but it isn't. Like, there's differences in every culture and every language, which is really cool.
Basically, we're doing a role play, right?
Yeah, role plays, and it's huge. Like even in the English classes that we teach, we always see how students are able to just kind of take on a different role, like the activity says. But like you said, it gives them that context that's so needed. Now, what are some of the challenges that you face teaching Chinese to business people from all over the world? Can you give us some examples or some of the things you encountered?
Yeah, because as a teacher, the main responsibility for us is to teach, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the class or whatever, online or in physical environment, you just to teach. All you need to do is to teach, to deliver the content to the students, answer their question, give them feedback. That's your main responsibility. But when it comes to start a business, it's lots of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And you as one person, you wear lots of hats, right?
Right.
You have to do the marketing part, the sales part, the content part, and also, everything is relying on your shoulder. So I would say the most challenging thing for me right now is how to find the potential client and how to make the sales successful, because we're not professional salesperson, right? Yeah. So we have, very limited sales skill when it comes to how to persuade people to buy your service, right? So that's a big challenge for me right now. But it's a learning process, right?
Yeah, it is difficult. It's something we've talked about a lot in our previous episodes. You can have the best program, the best course, the best classes in the world, but unless you position them and market them and promote them in the right way, then it can be really difficult. So yeah, I think it is a real challenge. And it's the same obviously for every language, not just English. So it's good to hear that we're not alone in that context.
Yeah.
So Liping, many of our listeners work with or teach Chinese students. So kind of on the other side, but what are some things that they need to consider when teaching Chinese learners? What advice could you share from the other side?
I think, for ESL teachers, I guess they have lots of Chinese learners because, it's a huge market, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of Chinese learners and they need to learn English. So myself is an English learner as well. English is not my first language, and my first language is, of course, Mandarin, right? So speaking from my own experience, I would say the number one thing I would give to ESL teachers, the number one, not like suggestion or something, just my 2 cents, just pay attention to the context. I cannot stress this enough. Pay attention to the context, because in different contexts, we use different language, we use different body language, we use different even facial expression, right? Regardless of what kind of language you're learning. For example, in Chinese culture, when you say hello to a person, if the person is a stranger, you never met him before, you can simply say ni hao, no problem. But if that person is somebody that you already know, and you're kind of close to him, or let's say if he's a friend, you cannot use ni hao. That's not an appropriate thing to say. You have to use something different. If that person is a senior, is much older than you, you have to use different language. So that's what I'm talking about. It's all about a context. I believe it's the same in English. If you say hello to your friend, you can simply say, hi, what's up, right? No problem. But if you say hello to your professor or to your boss, to your supervisor, you cannot just say, hi, dude, what up?
Right.
It's not going to work the same, is it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, that will be considered not appropriate thing to do, right?
Yeah. And that sounds like a good idea to me too. Like it's something that I wouldn't think when teaching a Chinese student. I know in Korea it's the same. Like when teaching a student from China or Korea, I wouldn't think that student maybe is shy about saying hi because they're not sure how to say hi.
Yeah, sometimes maybe they're not sure what to say.
Yeah, I often even get students asking me how old I am so that they kind of know how to do that. But here, like, it doesn't really matter, right? Because we don't really follow those. Now, and that to me sounds like something that would be really like interesting even for your social media. And I know you create social media content. Now, what cultural awareness issues normally resonate well with your audience? Like thinking of examples like that.
I think based on my content, the content get a lot of interaction with the audience. It's always the part about the Chinese culture. Because the language part, sometimes it's not that hard to figure out, right? We have Google Translation. We have lots of tools that you can take advantage of to help you to understand the meaning. But the hard part is that you cannot translate it, or you cannot just interpret it by yourself. It's the culture part. For example, the culture etiquette, the way we communicate, the style that we communicate, like how to greet people, how to exchange gifts, for example, and how to say goodbye, how to address people based on their title or based on their age, right? So those kind of things that it's oftentimes it's gonna cause conflicts and misunderstanding, right? So those kind of content, I noticed that it resonated with my audience a lot.
So it's more about the nuances, right? The very kind of getting down to the granular level, things you wouldn't think about. But for you, it's very natural. But to a learner, they'd be like, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
They wouldn't think that this is different in Chinese, or that I needed to. Yeah,
exactly. I remember this one of my video. It's about how to call Chinese people based on the relationship with them. For example, if that person is not very close to you, or let's say you just met, maybe the first time or the second time, you cannot call them by using their first name. For example, in English culture, in Western culture, it's very common, right? I can call you Daniel or Faye, that's no problem, right?
Yeah.
But in Chinese culture, even we are the first time for us to meet each other, but in Chinese culture, you don't call people by their first name when you first time to meet them. Only family members and close friends can call each other by using their first name. For example, if I am Li Ping, right? If you call me Li Ping, it's fine. In English, I mean, in English context, right?
Sounds fine, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds fine. But in Chinese culture, if let's say you guys are my Chinese friend and you call me Li Ping and we never met before, that's gonna sounds weird to me.
Right, yeah. But it's interesting that you yourself already know that when you switch the language, you switch the culture, but a lot of our students might not realize that, right?
Yeah.
Like changing languages often is just changing just the whole way you should think and behave. Now, why do you think it's important for all teachers to understand their audience and be able to communicate with them effectively?
I think, let's talk about it. The ESL teacher, if you're not like me and start a business or stuff like that, if you're just simply teaching your student, right? So you need to understand their needs, right? Their goal and their learning style, and what kind of learning strategy works for them, because everybody's different, right? Some of the learners are more visual learners. Some of the learners, they like more, speaking or listening. It's different, right? So that's the one reason you need to understand your audience. Another reason is that I think, because it's just my personal opinion, I think that teaching is not just about, delivering the knowledge. It's about making connection with people. Because you're not just teaching them to learn a language, to learn a knowledge, learn a grammar, a piece of grammar. You're teaching them a lot of things, more than just on the surface level. Like you're teaching them culture, you're teaching them how to be a bad person. You teach them how to be more productive, or how to communicate more effectively, how to, how do I say that? Like how to be a better person, and deliver your love, and be more conscious, and create more beautiful world for people around you, become a better person. That's what I believe. Teaching is a very noble job.
Oh yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
We talked about this. It's about kind of being genuine, being honest, being yourself, and projecting who you are to that student, so they can build a connection and they can obviously trust in what you do and believe in what you do as well. I think that's really
exactly important. And we as a teacher, I think we should be a role model for the students, to understand them, to care about them, to know who they are, and of course know who we are, right? So that we can set up a model for them. Think about it. For students, they get out for, let's say, middle schoolers, high schoolers, they spend much more time with their teachers than spend time with their parents, right? Because some of them, they're at the school. They maybe just go home maybe once a month, right?
Right. Yeah. It's really true. Wow.
So that's what I believe.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, Li Ping, what are some of the observations you found going from an English learner to a Chinese teacher, having seen both sides of the classroom? So what are some things you've noticed being on both sides?
I think for me, because speaking from my experience, I have been a language teacher for so long, and myself also, love learning language. I've been learning English for so long, and I'm learning Spanish, so I do have a passion for learning language. So I think from my observation from both sides is that learning language is about using it, right? The primary goal for us to learn language is to use it to communicate. That's why we learn it, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, why context is important, because we need to use it to communicate in different contexts, right? So I would say that the purpose of learning language is to use it to communicate. And when you teach, when you design your class, and when you try to, let's say, teach a piece of language grammar points, always think about this. Your goal is to help your students use it in real life situation, help them actually use it to communicate. So that's my main takeaway from my experience from both sides. And also for learners, I would suggest them to really look at their goal, really set up a goal for themselves, because everybody's different. I mean, if you're a student, your goal may just speak better or pass exam, right? So once you set up the goal, focus on that goal. Let's say if you are somebody already, you got a job and you need to speak English, you need to be more confident, and you need to communicate better in English. And your goal is to learn and be focused on improving skills in related to your job performance, right? So if you have lots of time and you are just learning English for fun, you really enjoy learning English as a general language. And you can watch movies, listen to music, lots of things you can do, right? Yep. But if I am somebody working for a company, I need to improve my English. I cannot do that because I don't have that much time, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Different goal depends on which strategy works best for you. So once you set up the goal, choose the best strategy for you and focus, and then it will help you to reach your goal more faster and more efficiently. So stop learning English as a general language.
Yes.
I always tell my learners, it seems for English, stop learning Chinese as a general language. What is your goal?
Focus. Yeah, we've talked about that too. Like you have to have specific goals too, not just I want to be fluent, right?
Exactly.
Like what are you going to use the language for? Yeah, that's always great advice.
Perfect. Yeah. Great, Li-Ping. Thank you so much for your advice, and you shared some really, really interesting insights, because we don't always consider these things as English teachers primarily, and it's really nice to get a new perspective from another language, which also relates to us a lot. So we can definitely learn a lot from this as English teachers too. So how can our listeners find out more about you and learn about your business, Li-Ping?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can find me by searching my name, Li-Ping Yan. Yes, my last name. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and where I post the contents very frequently. And also I have my a YouTube channel. So Learning Chinese for Business, and you can search it as well to find me. So those are two platforms right now I'm trying to promote.
Wonderful. Yeah. We'll promote those for you. We'll share the links in the description for the episode as well. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Li-Ping.
Thank you, guys.
So that was great. And as always, please remember, you can get in touch with us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or send an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also visit our website to access this and all of our previous episodes from every season for free. And also join us on Patreon for even more benefits, webinars, merchandise, and a lot more. Just go to esl-talk.com or our Instagram to find out more. You can find me at Learning with Faye. Faye is F-E-Y.
Or I'm Daniel Teacher. So that's it for this week. We'll see you again next week for a new episode of ESL Talk.